Is it hot in here, or is it just news? No, you're right, it's hot. It's pretty hot here on planet Earth. And somehow, it just keeps getting hottier and reddier all the time. We're like the Alex Jones of astronomical objects. Now look, come on. Baby, pumpkin, sea, food. I understand. No one wants to talk about climate change. It's this big looming disaster, and we all feel kind of helpless to stop it now that we've realized that cutting up those plastic loops that hold together soda cans while potentially saving hypothetical sea turtles and, I don't know, hypocritical baby beavers isn't actually going to move the needle in a global, worldwide, preventing the oceans from swallowing our cities whole context. But I promise, this isn't just going to be one of those depressing, sad sack videos about how the Earth is heating up and we just keep emitting more and more carbon into the upper atmosphere, and soon all that will be left of our beautiful lush green homeworld will be a combination of the Mad Max and Waterworld futures, except there's one guy who still controls a working radio antenna, and he uses it exclusively to promote shooting ivermectin directly into both eyeballs. Is Kevin Costner an ivermectin guy? Just baseball? Okay. Anyway, this video isn't about the end of the world or whatever, or rather, we will try to, go easy on that. It's about something totally different that we think you're gonna really love. Infrastructure. Ha. Well, it's Infrastructure Week. Probably not looking it up. But it's the week in which I am talking about infrastructure, is my point. And not a moment too soon, as Hurricane Ida has just finished battering the Louisiana coast before taking a post-devastation victory lap up in New York, reminding us once more that the vital systems Americans routinely rely on for things like public transit and power grids, the stuff that conducts the daily business of being alive in the society we've built for ourselves, well, they aren't even close to being prepared for extreme weather events that might increase in frequency due to sky reasons. New York and other cities, for example, have a habit of completely flooding due to these cities' lack of drainage systems. That's, of course, on top of the massive blackouts that seem inevitable and frequent.
The Entergy Power Company has shown specifics of the area where the power is out. And though it's about 1.18 million customers, our own calculations at CNBC shows that's an area where roughly 2.5 million people live. Power, a serious concern. And listen to this. There are 8 major transmission lines that supply power to the city of New Orleans. They began failing yesterday afternoon, and now all of them are out, which means, according to the local power authority, the city of New Orleans will be without power for at least days, and one commissioner there is suggesting it could be much longer than that, depending on how badly those power lines are damaged.
That's Entergy, provider of New Orleans power, suffering a catastrophic failure that took out all 8 of the city's transmission lines, leaving an estimated 2 million people pretty darn, fudged, f***ed. But to make them extra super duper that's atop the 240,000 residents who were impacted by water outages, flooded streets, and property damage that locals are still trying to wrap their heads around. This amounts to early estimates pegging the damage at around $40 billion, so that's probably not good. Except when I said the word pegging just now, none of this seems good. It seems bad. And each season now, it sure seems that more and more US cities are targeted by these megastorms, right? For mysterious reasons. But even though Mother Nature has lost the element of surprise, somehow we never seem prepared in the moment. We're like Charlie Brown, only instead of Lucy, it's a giant storm cloud pulling the football away. And instead of just embarrassingly falling onto our butts after shouting, "Wait, how did a cloud just do that?" entire towns just get permanently wiped off the map. Good grief. Every 4 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers gives the United States infrastructure a letter grade, and in 2020, that grade was a C-. Now, that sounds bad, because it is, but it's actually an improvement from some of the previous grades, which were closer to the D range, which is also bad. We got a D, which academically stands for dick poor. But then later, we got a C-, or poor minus. So much like our move from President Trump to President Biden, we were in immediate danger of our nationwide infrastructure dropping out of school entirely and becoming a Dickensian street urchin. But now, our infrastructure might be able to hang in there, skate through on a technicality and become, I don't know, a cop or something. The issue is, a lot of these improvements that brought us from bad job, just terrible, to bad job, less terrible, happened at the state and local level. And the big picture stuff that really needs to happen, like upgrades to interstate transit, the highway system, our nation's water supply, bore-proof bunkers, largely need to come from the federal level. But good news, maybe. A $1 trillion bill that would address the nation's infrastructure is actually, as of now, pretty close to passing through the House. In fact, Democratic leadership has made a non-binding commitment to vote on the measure by September 27th, which is the most firm kind of commitment you can make short of actually making any kind of commitment. Hey, promise I'm gonna do that. Great. So long as you don't hold me to any of this. Okay, that seems weird, but okay. Yeah, it seems like whatever I say it is, actually. Unless I don't say, then it seems like not. That's how the conversation would play out. If I weren't like talking to a person, but rather reading a teleprompter and trying to do the dialogue back and forth. Anyway, the Senate already passed its own version of an infrastructure bill back on August 10th by a 69 to 30 vote. Even Mitch McConnell backed it over continued objections from former President Angry Dad Loser, who was upset for reasons upon which he declined to elaborate. Probably something to do with wokeness or taking dumps too large for human toilets.
This is the stuff that focuses on roads, tunnels, bridges, your more traditional hard infrastructure. That was always the first track of this process. Now that has passed the Senate.
So there's still at least a month of wrangling in Congress over what specifically this legislation will include and what will be left out, and what will be included in the separate $3.5 trillion budget resolution that's also being knocked around the House, and what's going to be included in neither one, and we could untangle this all for you, but at this point, it's purely speculative anyway, and also probably haunted or like really boring. I mean, I just don't want to. All of the above. But what does seem likely to make it through all the committees and arguments is around $550 billion in new federal spending that includes $65 billion to expand high-speed internet, $110 billion to upgrade roads and bridges, $25 million to make airports slightly less terrible, $66 billion to make Amtrak slightly less terrible, $8 billion to upgrade water infrastructure systems in the American West, $73 billion to upgrade the nation's electricity grid, allowing it to accept more renewable energy, $1 billion to restore the Great Lakes, and many more. Now, that might sound like a lot if you're one of those loser countries, but this is only a fraction of the money many congressional Democrats wanted for big-picture environmental initiatives, and it leaves out a lot of specific plans, like building additional electric vehicle charging stations, electrifying 50,000 transit buses, and replacing all those pipes that still have lead in them. Can you believe we still have pipes with lead in them? If that sounds like the kind of antiquated problem Dwight D. Eisenhower should have been dealing with instead of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., that's because it totally super was. It was always a problem. Here's an LA Times article from 1903 about an entire family being poisoned by their pipes that blamed the plumber. We've had so much time to figure this out, and just didn't? But even if you doubled the size of this entire bill as it stands right now, there would still be a pretty serious problem. It's almost like, instead of spending small amounts of money to incrementally fix problems, we just ignored them for a long while. It's like an old car that we can't afford, or rather don't care to maintain, slowly adding new and exciting engine screeches until it literally explodes on the highway. As time moves forward, a thing we can't do anything about yet, the price tag will just get higher until we have to gut the whole thing, or go to one of those dealerships and get a cool new country. Ooh, maybe one of those new hybrid countries, or better yet, something that doesn't run on fossil fuels altogether, but also not a Tesla if we can manage it, but we'll probably end up getting a Tesla if we can afford it. And I think maybe you should sit down, because all of this fossil fuel talk actually means there's something we need to discuss. Listen. This isn't your fault, okay? And your mother and I love you very much. But it turns out we can't really talk about infrastructure without talking about something else. And I know you're not going to like it, but I think it's important that we're all straight with each other. So I'm putting it on the table. This is actually a climate change episode. Also, I f***ed your mom. You may have seen that back in early August, stop crying. You may have seen that back in early August, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, released a 3,500-page report on the state of the global climate crisis. And you may have also blocked most of what it actually said from your mind, because it's really sad and horrible. And that might make it hard to function through the rest of your daily routine of watching this video a couple times. So here's a quick recap.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change. That's the finding of a new study by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the most up-to-date assessment of how global warming will change the world in the coming decades. Environmental experts have called it a massive wake-up call to governments to cut emissions.
The panel concludes we'll see a lot more fires as temperatures continue to rise. And rise they will as greenhouse gas emissions keep growing and growing. The increased heat will change weather patterns, bringing more droughts and more rainfall, researchers say.
As a result, today we have the clearest picture of how the Earth's climate functions and how human activities affect it.
These radical changes to our climate are man-made and directly connected to our constant burning of fossil fuels. We've already raised global temperatures by about 1.2 degrees Celsius, and the IPCC notes that global warming is happening faster than we thought. It could unavoidably exceed another 1.5 degrees just over the next few decades, and there's pretty much nothing we can even do about that. Some other pretty major global changes, like rising sea levels due to melting ice sheets, are also largely inescapable at this point. The only way we can realistically stop or even slow this trend beyond the parts that are already locked in is by eliminating greenhouse gas emissions quickly, like right now. If you are personally emitting a greenhouse gas as you watch this, stop it! That's not me coming down on you. That's literally what the UN is saying. But also, by you, I'm mainly referring to mega corporations and also the regular kind. And perhaps we shouldn't buy into the idea that changing the environment is left to the individual when companies are barely held accountable for the massive damage they knowingly did. Anywho, the report was compiled by more than 200 experts from over 60 countries and cites more than 14,000 independent studies. Bear in mind, too, that historically, the IPCC has been cautious. The Reagan administration helped put the entire thing together, and that guy's only concern about a change in the climate was when Nancy told him he had to stop calling women broads. But you don't need some international panel of top nerds in their field who spent decades studying this specific problem to tell you that the weather is bad out there and getting worse. Although, why wouldn't you listen to them? That just seems ridiculous. But no, I encourage you to do your own research here. Like maybe, I don't know, open up a window. Back in June, the Pacific Northwest was hit by a record heat wave of an intensity never before recorded in that part of the world by human beings. It was over 108 degrees in Portland, hot enough to motivate up to 15 guys to remove their beanies.
The heat in the Pacific Northwest burning through records. In Portland, Oregon, the temperature Sunday at 112, the hottest ever recorded there, and it could reach 114 today.
And look, we're not just talking about the world getting hotter in isolation. That's a common and inaccurate way of dismissing this problem. Like, we'll all just adjust by enjoying a daily creamsicle with the fridge door open and selling our beachfront condos to those sea monster kids from Luca or something. We're talking about a radical series of alterations to the way our planet functions, which is going to introduce a whole host of changes, most of them very dangerous for tiny, fleshy, fragile human bodies and entirely unpredictable, even for our smartest, tiny, fleshy, fragile human brains. I know brains aren't technically like flesh, it's fine. move on. Climate change fuels what some cool, slick scientists, who obviously also understand branding, have termed weather whiplash, describing a situation in which conditions shift rapidly between extremes. A 2018 paper suggests that California could soon see an increase in both very wet and very dry weather, plus an increase in the frequency when a very wet year follows a very dry year. In July, Western Europe experienced record floods that killed 189 people and left thousands without power or access to drinking water. The Colorado River, which supplies water to 40 million people, not to mention providing hydroelectric power and irrigation water to crops across 7 US and 2 Mexican states, is running out of water. A thing we need. Hurricane season starts earlier all the time, and the higher temperatures make the storms themselves larger and higher intensity. In fact, just last month, monsoon-type rains near Douglas, Arizona actually started to blow down portions of former President Trump's border wall. Wait a second! It was going to turn our entire southern border into an impenetrable fortress! This thing was supposed to stand proudly through a 1,000-year Reich! Boy, I hope Mexico gets their money back. And that's not just a hilarious example, but an instructive, hilarious example. These massive storms and wildfires and other consequences of the steady rise in global temperatures are just going to keep impacting our infrastructure in bigger and more all-consuming ways. And our cities and towns and roads and ports must be designed and upgraded in ways that consider the changes that are coming to our climate over the next few months, years, and decades. We try to put them into these separate buckets so we can deal with them sensibly one at a time, but this is like trying to follow a story by only focusing on one character. Okay, I get what's happening with Miss Piggy. She's being seduced by Charles Grodin because who wouldn't be? But how does Gonzo fit into all of this? We'll certainly explore that and other Muppet content, perhaps. But first, a message of advertisement-wise style. It's an ad. Hey, it's me! You know, ever since I was a wee Cody, I've been making up little songs about the shadowy man who lives deep inside my ear. I call him Mr. Dark Smiles, and he helps me get by, no big deal. And as I got older, I wanted to know more and more about songs and music. And now, thanks to Skillshare, I can continue to hone my skills with an online learning platform featuring thousands of inspiring classes for anyone looking to explore new skills or deepen an existing talent. Because we all have a little creativity in us, whether we flex those brain muscles as a kid or just yesterday. Creativity is good. We like it. Which is why we've teamed up with Skillshare to offer our first 1,000 subscribers a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium by clicking the link in the description below. Look! See? Music! It's proof! Not to mention that Skillshare offers classes for photography and graphic design and art and creative writing and also animation. That's another thing Cody likes. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning and honing your skills, which is why there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes as well. Folks, it's important to have a strong community to help you grow. Skillshare believes this and works to cultivate an online environment of fellow creatives who can help inspire and encourage your art. They have live classes too. Get that sweet, real-time inspiration by connecting with and working alongside popular teachers and other members. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner, hobbyist, mind phantom, or master of your craft. Skillshare has it all. And so once again, our first 1,000 subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Tell them Mr. Dark Smile sent you. They'll know what that means. Okay, and we're back, and we're horny for infrastructure and how it pertains to climate change. So yeah, pretty much every infrastructure-related concern is secretly also a climate change concern, which makes sense. Of course, the essential systems and platforms that make our everyday lives possible will be impacted by the world getting much hotter and the seas rising. It would be weird if they didn't. That June heat wave in the Pacific Northwest cracked and softened asphalt, destroying roads. Train service had to be halted due to concern that the excessive heat would warp the train tracks. Power cables melted on the Portland streetcar, also forcing it to cancel service, as did the local light rail system because the overhead wires aren't usable once they hit 120 degrees. In February, a sudden spike in energy demand brought about by Winter Storm Uri strained our power grid so badly, millions of Americans lost power. While Ted Cruz took a break from his Border Patrol cosplay to do Happy Man on Vacation with his loving family cosplay, 4.2 million Texans were affected, and President Biden declared a state of emergency. Even before California's current mega drought, scientists added the mega, not me, the state estimated it already needed $4.7 billion to fix its water system. As of right now, 80,000 wells in California are at risk of failing to provide locals with affordable, uncontaminated water, a thing that we once again need for life. And also log flume rides, and some other stuff, like those cool fountains at Universal City Walk, and for being alive. Another potential theme park problem is that the sea at the southern end of the Florida Peninsula has risen more than 5 inches since 1993 and could be 6 inches higher by 2030. That doesn't just fully displace 800,000 Miami-Dade County residents, mind you, although it does do that. It also mucks up the city's entire sewer, septic, and draining systems. And though we're not really sure what specifically caused that condominium collapse in Miami Beach over the summer, sea rise could very well have been a contributing factor. Underneath a lot of southern Florida sits sand and organic fill that starts to sink when the water level rises, and the porous limestone under Miami allows rising seawaters to filter up through the ground, which can erode and weaken the concrete foundations of buildings, not to mention causing floods even on non-rainy days and threatening access to fresh water. One study estimated that extreme weather events already cost the United States $95 billion in damage in 2020 alone. So even though the congressional Democrats' new bill addresses some immediate concerns, it's not really looking at the big picture. Because again, all of these problems not only remain, but get exponentially worse until we do the one thing the legislation isn't taking on at all, which is not digging up and then burning so much oil and natural gas all the time, every day, constantly, nonstop. In fact, neither the Senate nor the House version of the bill currently mandates any kind of reduction in fossil fuels, or even provides mechanisms to start doing so. In many instances, it actually extends a lifeline to the polluters and energy companies that created these problems to begin with. And none of this is all that surprising when you consider that fully 1/3 of the senators who authored the bill are part of the infamous Exxon 11. This was the group that ExxonMobil, in its own internal documents, argued were crucial to its Washington lobbying efforts.
Legal declarations show that Senator Manchin has received tens of thousands of dollars from ExxonMobil and its trade associations. Keith McCoy names 10 other senators as crucial to ExxonMobil. Senators Mark Kelly, Chris Coons, Shelley Moore Capito, Kirsten Sinema, John Tester, Maggie Hassan, John Barrasso, Steve Daines, John Cornyn, and Marco Rubio.
Which helps to explain why the bill, when you start really digging into the details, seems like kind of a big, wet, sloppy, bipartisan energy industry makeout sesh. It actually weakens some critical environmental review processes. One section exempts oil and gas pipelines on federal land from even being subject to environmental assessments. It's right around the part that calls for logging 30 million acres of federal forests and lays out $1.6 trillion in subsidies for the logging industry under the guise of wildfire risk reduction. Hey, who was that guy who wanted to cut down trees in order to stop wildfires?
They also have to do cuts. I mean, people don't like to do cuts, but they have to do cuts in between. So if you do have a fire and it gets away, you'll have a 50-yard cut in between, so it won't be able to catch to the other side. They don't do that. If you go to other countries, you go to Austria, you go to Finland, you go to many different countries, and they don't have fire. I was talking to a head of a major country, and he said, we're a forest nation. We consider ourselves a forest nation. This was in Europe. I said, that's a beautiful term. He said, we have trees that are far more explosive. He meant explosive in terms of fire. But we have trees that are far more explosive than they have in California, and we don't have any problem because we manage our forests. So we have to do that in California too.
Well, I'm sure he knew what he was talking about. I mean, he wouldn't just make stuff up about solving climate change that he didn't even believe in by cutting down trees, even though that's literally the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Not on Infrastructure Week. So yeah, hard to rely on the people who can actually, do stuff to help. Hard to feel like we all need to pitch in when giant polluters have yet to fully own up to their massive, massive part in all of this. When we ask companies to report about their carbon footprint, they include what are known as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 means the carbon they personally put into the atmosphere through their own operations, and Scope 2 refers to indirect emissions from electricity, steam, heat, or cooling that the company purchases. But what doesn't get counted, and what makes up the bulk of most companies' actual real-world emissions, are called Scope 3, emissions from all of the other companies in the main company's value chain. This means that a lot of net zero carbon pledges, the backbone of all claims by responsible corporations who say they are doing their part to solve the climate crisis, are meaningless, as they don't include an average of 65 to 95% of the company's actual emissions. Some companies, including Apple, claim they are already including Scope 3 emissions in their reporting, but we don't currently have good ways to verify this. ExxonMobil also claims to have reported on Scope 3 emissions for the first time in 2021, but notes that its own data is less certain and less consistent, and also called it misleading. I mean, at least they're admitting it. But also, first time in 2021, not even the bare minimum of trying. So, we still don't get accurate data about how much CO2 these dirty-ass companies are actually pumping into the atmosphere. $15 billion goes to supporting dubious carbon capture projects, plus $300 million more goes to additional research on carbon capture technology, over the objections of environmental groups. Carbon capture, by the way, is the idea that you can keep on burning fossil fuels and creating greenhouse gas emissions, but then just store them underground forever instead of releasing them into the atmosphere. Well, why don't we try it, you might ask? That's the thing. We have. The US already has about 4,500 miles of carbon capture pipelines underground, the largest such network in the world, and it's already failing miserably. The only carbon capture coal plant in the entire country shut down in February after requiring so much heat and energy to run that its owners, NRG, had to build, and this is true, a separate natural gas power plant to keep it going. And where do those emissions go? Well, hear me out. We buy a huge balloon, but like really big.
The chemical is then heated to release the gas, producing a stream of pure carbon dioxide that's compressed and sent through a pipeline to a well.
Meanwhile, experts said we need $60 billion to remove lead service lines from our pipes. Then President Biden, who loves to make a deal, you gotta compromise, you gotta art of the deal it, asked Congress for $45 billion to get this done. What's $15 billion when it's just people getting lead poisoning? Then, the Democrats' own bill provides just $15 billion for it. So we're underfunding the fixing of the old pipes by $45 billion, but then spending a big chunk of that money on fancy new carbon pipes we probably can't even generate enough power to use. And it just seems like pretty much all of our solutions remain pipe-based, which is fine if you're rescuing a princess from King Koopa in the greatest movie of all time, but not so much if you want to keep people alive on the surface of the Earth beyond this century. Consider the Permian Basin. No, you sit there and you consider it! This is the large chunk of the southwestern United States that provides us with 40% of our national supply of oil and natural gas. So as you might imagine, underground, it's crisscrossed by all manner of pipelines. It's also leaking millions of metric tons of invisible and difficult to detect methane gas into our atmosphere every year, and we're not even sure where it's happening or why.
Methane is invisible and odorless, so it's very difficult to detect with the naked eye. But there are technologies that allow people to visualize methane.
Methane just routinely leaks from the ground into the air, and no one does anything about it. But there's no overarching system to even detect and report these leaks. Most of the time, if anyone does it, it's volunteers and non-profit organizations. Fixing this would do more than any other single measure we're talking about to stall climate change. 1/3 of all global warming is based on human-caused methane emissions, and we could do something about this without even cutting consumption. I mean, can we build more pipes on top top of those pipes to fix it? I don't know. I'm out of ideas. So even if you can make the case that this legislation is a positive step forward, it's not only too small, but it fundamentally lacks the kind of ambition and vision we need in order to actually make a real impact on this problem. Like so much of the Earth Day rhetoric and climate change action we've seen over the past few decades, it's a lot of upbeat talk and deck chair rearranging, but without the bold and dramatic steps required to fix the one thing we know we need to do, but just don't want to face. So this is all definitely a bummer, except not completely, because the good news here is that things are more complex than simply being bad or good. In a weird, completely depressing way, this news is a bit reassuring, because at least we know there are things we could be doing better. And so technically speaking, it's, I guess, better than if we were trying our hardest and still not making headway, right? Going back to our grade status, we're like a kid who got a D because we didn't actually study or do any work. And so we could, theoretically, actually do the work to make our situation better. Maybe do our homework, play less Call of Duty, and stop masturbating all the time. Okay, like, maybe 2 out of those 3 at least. Actually, that reminds me, hold on. Whew! Okay, and going back to New Orleans, one of the wins we got was that the levees that famously failed during Katrina did, in fact, work this time. And while that's really good news and saved a lot of lives, it's also a really good microcosm of the largest systemic issue, which is America only waiting for things to go horribly wrong before actually fixing it. We fix bridges after they collapse. Flint's water pipes get replaced while ignoring all of the other cities with potential contamination. On a larger scale of this, we look at something like the ozone layer. The good news, and it is good news, is that the hole over Antarctica we used to worry about is actually repairing. Even better news is that it's being repaired because of our efforts to cut down on the chemicals that were damaging it. We saw a problem that sure seemed irreversible, took actual steps to solve the problem, and now the problem is actually being solved. We have that potential to fix things. But what we need to start doing, and we being the people making this infrastructure bill, is getting ahead of this. Regular maintenance, the country equivalent of brushing our teeth. So what should we be doing? Well, we should all be brushing our teeth, that's for sure. Cavities do not around. But also, the folks at Oxfam International have pointed out that it's not enough for governments to accelerate use of renewable energies, but also reduce overall energy demand, aiming for net zero emissions, as in trying to take away more carbon in the atmosphere than we're putting out, is impossible if we're just trying to offset the current emissions. And instead, we have to focus on actual reduction, and that means ending subsidies to fossil fuel industries, forcing banks to switch investments over from fossil fuels to more sustainable energy sources like wind and solar, or taxing carbon emissions and then funneling that money to vulnerable communities that are being directly impacted by climate change. It seems very obvious, except for the part where we're not doing it. Renewables make up only about 20% of the US power mix today, and we could be doing a lot better. As of September 2020, 452 cities and 22 regions across the US have committed to hitting net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and some are moving even faster than that. Burlington, Vermont is on track to become a net zero city by 2030, and they were the first US city to run entirely on renewable electricity back in 2014. This was done largely through incentives like rebates for residents who install energy-efficient heat pumps, but there were also some mandates like an impact fee assigned to any home or building that still relies on fossil fuel for heat. But these steps were only possible because the city owns the power utility. So it's not just bluster when politicians set new metrics. Many cities get their power from investor-owned utilities, requiring a constant negotiation. These are just some of the complexities that someone is going to need to untangle. Someone being the people who are in power and can actually implement these sweeping changes. Yes, and will. But let's say, hypothetically, that our government is jam-packed with a horde of bumbling clownwads who seem more concerned with squabbling about cancel culture and removing women's healthcare rights than thinking about fundamental preparation for and prevention of climate change. Hypothetically, let's say the people in power fail us. It's one of the most nihilist aspects of this conversation, the feeling that we, the individual, can only sit back and watch in horror as this stuff goes down. But that's not quite true. And in fact, our individual actions can make a substantial difference in combating climate change. And no, not by switching our straw preference, but by something called community resilience. In short, the phrase is exactly what it sounds like. Communities that have established immediate resources and plans for when an economic or societal or climate disaster affects them. Not only does such a system respond faster, but they're generally more trusted and can easily connect with government aid down the road. In Haiti, for example, after the 2010 earthquake, FEMA found that a series of pre-existing social groups within neighborhoods not only had a built-in system of volunteers and resources, but were far more accepted than outside humanitarian efforts. And most of the failures in that case didn't come from supply shortages or slow response, but rather government efforts to connect with those communities. Overall, they determined that the effectiveness of those local helpers came from the fact that they were well established in their communities and therefore more immediately visible to residents, and most importantly, understood the specific needs of that area. To put it really simply, talk to your neighbors. Don't snitch on them, talk to them. Because if a hurricane or snowstorm comes or the moon crashes into Earth in a really awesome and believable way, they are the people you will be relying on. You know, look for the helpers, etc. See if your neighborhood has a pre-existing organization for this, and if they don't, perhaps see about starting one. Many of you watching no doubt have mixed feelings about your community. Perhaps there's a large presence of Trump flags, or meth labs, or Trumpy meth labs, or God forbid you live near a performance arts college, and you look at the stories of Katrina and all the looting, or you just read Lord of the Flies, or for some reason are continuing to watch The Walking Dead, and it feels like humanity is destined to eat each other alive. Well, the good news there is that nearly all of that is bullshit. The good news is that disasters are nonpartisan and often cause people to come together. And that looting in Katrina the media was so concerned about, well, it turns out that we've since had multiple studies and examinations showing that it didn't really happen like that. And in fact, the fear of looting resulted in a worse situation than the actual looting. And what was perceived as looting at the time was actually people in the community gathering supplies. And if you've ever been in a nor'easter or hurricane or any kind of crisis, you probably already know that the cold hard truth is that when things get bad, humanity doesn't naturally resort to eating each other. If that were true, we wouldn't have made it this far. Maybe the rich. We'll probably eat the rich, all right? But that's not because they're rich so much as they'll be the people hoarding the resources. And so we'll have to, go get their resources like we're Bilbo Baggins fighting Smaug. And then, like Smaug, if they fight back and we have to defeat them, it's like, well, look at all this free dragon meat. It would be a shame to let all this dragon meat go to waste. Let's eat the dragon meat. The point is that we'll be okay-ish. And that's better than really bad. And there's hope and junk. Do we have a clip of hope and junk? Yeah. Hey, we did it! We made it all the way through another climate change episode. Now, who wants ice cream? Do you not keep ice cream under your desk for when you have to talk about climate change? You should try it. Seriously, this is my version of doing transcendental meditation. Does ice cream count as air conditioning? No? Because it's food? That makes sense. Hey everybody, thanks for watching another episode of the Some More News powerful show of information. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. We've got a patreon.com/somemorenews. We've got a podcast called Even More News, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we've got merch with Warmbow on it and other stuff on it. This was the first time somebody wrote a bit for me that involved eating something that's pleasant. So thank you, Lon, for this ice cream. It's just raw eggs. Oh my God.